Tonight, a growing confrontation is unfolding between Israel and the United Nations, and this time, it is not about troops on the ground. It is about diplomacy, legal pressure, sanctions campaigns, and the future of international legitimacy. Over the last year, multiple branches of the United Nations system have stepped up scrutiny of Israeli military operations in both Gaza Strip and southern Lebanon. Critics inside Israel say this amounts to an organized international effort to constrain military freedom of action. Supporters of those measures argue something very different. They say the issue is not politics, but accountability under international law. Arms pressure grows. In April 2026, 19 UN experts urged member states to suspend arms transfers to Israel. The experts argued that continued weapons transfers could expose states and companies to legal and political liability if those weapons violate humanitarian law. That matters because UN experts do not make binding law. Their reports increasingly shape diplomatic behavior inside Europe, Latin America, and parts of the global south. What was missing in much of the original coverage is this. These expert appeals are becoming part of a wider international legal ecosystem that includes national court challenges, export license reviews, parliamentary debates, and pressure campaigns aimed at defense contractors. In other words, even when there is no formal embargo, political risk rises. Security Council pressure is shifting. Inside the United Nations Security Council, the battle has also changed. For years, the United States has often shielded Israel through veto power, but recent abstentions and more nuanced language have allowed some resolutions to pass, particularly those calling for ceasefires, humanitarian access, and compliance with international law. That does not automatically create sanctions, but it does gradually shape diplomatic legitimacy. That is often how international pressure builds, first through language, then through legal framing, then through state-level policy changes. The legal battlefield is expanding. Another key piece often overlooked. The international pressure campaign is now increasingly legal, not merely political. The International Court of Justice and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights have repeatedly warned against permanent military occupation, forced population displacement, or long-term territorial control in Gaza. UN officials have also raised concerns about permanent buffer zone strategies in southern Lebanon. That matters because legal language like occupation, collective punishment, civilian protection, and forced displacement shapes how future sanctions, investigations, and international diplomatic isolation can evolve. Lebanon adds another flashpoint. The confrontation is also visible in southern Lebanon. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL, has accused Israeli forces of incidents involving observation towers, patrol routes, and peacekeeper positions. Israel disputes or investigates some of those allegations. But diplomatically, these incidents carry weight. Under international humanitarian law, attacks on UN personnel create serious international repercussions even when broader military operations continue. The Gaza playbook argument. Regional media, European analysts, and humanitarian organizations increasingly argue that what we're seeing is not isolated battlefield activity. They describe a broader strategic doctrine, temporary military operations gradually becoming semi-permanent territorial control that includes buffer zones, restricted civilian return, infrastructure degradation, long-duration security belts. This argument appears repeatedly in coverage from international outlets, regional media, and policy institutions, and that may be the most important missing context. The debate is no longer only about military strikes. It is increasingly about whether emergency wartime measures become permanent political geography. Could the UN deploy military force? Some legal scholars and humanitarian advocates have floated the idea of a UN-mandated international protection force under the responsibility to protect doctrine. But realistically, that remains highly unlikely. Why? Because such a force would require Security Council authorization. And with geopolitical divisions involving the United States, Russia, and China, that remains politically improbable. What happens next? Here is where the story stands tonight. The United Nations cannot directly disarm Israel. It cannot command the Israeli military. It cannot impose military outcomes by itself, but it can do something else. It can shape the legal narrative. It can influence allies. It can affect export policy. It can alter diplomatic legitimacy. And over time, that can become strategically significant. That is why this matters. Because modern conflicts are fought not only with missiles and their defense systems, they're also fought through law, legitimacy, and international political pressure. I'm Michael Patterson, and this is Free Press TV. Stay informed, stay aware, and remember, truth has no agenda.